Well, my name is Celeste Lazaris, and I'm a horse trainer and a body worker. And if you've heard of something called Balanced Movement Method, that's my jam. It's my business. Basically, I am a former competitive rider. When my daughter gets a little bit older, I am hopeful to go back to being able to say I'm a current competitive rider as well. But we're mom life at its finest. But yeah, basically, I've just kind of taken a lot of years and combined training from being a human therapist and an equine therapist and a horse trainer and horse men, just over my entire life, and combined everything into what I consider to be a relatively simple, albeit not easy, methodology. And I say methodology loosely. It's really just a bunch of, a set of principles and a checklist to go through to learn how to understand how the horse is moving biomechanically in a correct way, how to be really cognizant of their nervous system, compressed nerves, both from being in a lot of tension from like fight flight patterns and from poor biomechanics is, in my opinion, kind of an epidemic in the industry. And it's something that I really like to educate on. It's something that's really wonderful for, a lot of our like-minded friends to get together. Wendy is a huge advocate for this. It's been going on for years. Our friend Jillian is a big one on it. I mean, there's so many of us, I think, that like come together and try to talk about it, and we're all hitting it from different lenses. And so any chance I get to just get on anything and just chat with you guys and riff about all of our similar findings and from our lenses, and I think is really helpful because it allows people to hear it in different ways and maybe be able to translate it a little bit better for their horses. So that's it.
I think you're right. And we're all kind of trying to eat the elephant from our own perspective because there's so many different facets.
So many.
And so by having all these different viewpoints, we're all basically working in the same direction, but we come from different viewpoints because of our backgrounds and our training and our education and our experience. And so I think that's what shapes each one of our lenses, but it gives it such a rich environment to explore because we're all looking at it slightly different, and you never know what's going to click with somebody, right? You never know, like saying something in just a tiny bit different way, and they're like, "Oh yeah." So it's awesome. All right, and so I'm remiss because I've been busy with all this other stuff. I forgot the topic of your talk tonight.
Well, it can be whatever you want. It can be a choose your own adventure talk if you like, Miss Wendy. I think our original title was something along the lines of understanding and how to help the modern horse in today's competitive environment.
Perfect.
Along those lines.
It's a great title.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go with it.
All right. So firstly, if it's okay, before we even get started into it, I would love to riff a little bit on SureFoot pads. I know that this is not like an advertisement for it, but for my clients that are on here, I'm sure that they've already heard me talk about it nonstop. But I started using them. You were so kind and you sent me a bunch of them. And so I went down the rabbit hole a little bit. And then our friend, Dr. Rachel Bellini, came out and I started working with her on even just using like because I don't pack all of them, but I take the half physio pad with me everywhere I go now. It's just everybody gets to play on the pad. And it's been really cool to see the way that, and I don't know if you've come up with other things, but I know way back when we had talked originally, you were like, there are so many different things going on and I don't even know all of them, but I know that it works. And one of the main things that I've been seeing in translation to my work and what they're doing is it's absolutely playing off of the myofascial kinetic lines. And it's really rad, like really cool to see that you can have, for those that don't know or you guys haven't studied them, and I very loosely, like I know enough to know how important they are, and I don't really educate on them a whole lot. I play with them in my own, like in my up years, but I don't talk too much about it because I don't feel educated really to say much. But I think all but one of them attach at the base of the skull or TMJ area, and then they go down and they attach into the feet, particularly P3 in the front feet and the hind feet. And so when you put them on the SureFoot pads, getting to watch all of the changes and the connections that happen throughout the body from them playing with that balance, and then how it translates to a lot of the connective. So a lot of what I do for the ridden stuff is we do a lot of bit release. We're focused a lot on the hyoid, the AO joint, how it translates down the neck. And horses that have been struggling and we've done manual work, we've done different things, and then we put them on the SureFit pads, and that little bit, that little bit that I just couldn't quite get to let go, they put them on the SureFit pads, and then it's like, oh, it's so nice, and you just watch them. Anyway, thank you is where I'm getting at, because they're brilliant and I love them, and they're just absolutely the missing piece to what I play with, and I just could not be more grateful. So
you are so welcome. And I did not ask her for a testimonial. This is totally impromptu.
No, I was just really excited to say it.
We haven't talked actually since that webinar, which was 2 years ago or something. So it's been a while, but we're starting to get research, and this is what's really cool is I was just over in the UK, and Russell from Centaur Biomechanics came and watched a demo that I did, and he was so excited because he could see the pectoral muscles moving and activating so rapidly, so quickly, and that change in balance. And so he wants to do some research now, looking at measuring the muscle activation in the pecs when the horse is on pads. So we're finally starting to get where we're going to get some data to back this up. But actually, like you said, the horses are the ones that show us that this works, and it's a nice adjunct to everything that people are doing, right? That's what's so cool. So awesome.
And it's gentle and it's nice. Dr. Bellini and I tag team on quite a few DSLD cases. It's like a secret, not a secret. It's like a little side, not a side hustle, but it's just something that we're really deeply interested in. And so we've tag teamed on quite a few of them, and doing the SureFit pads and how it wakes up all those little mechanoreceptors. And it's just, it's subtle and it's so profound, and it's just been, I don't know, it's been super rad. So everybody that's listening, you're missing out if you don't have SureFit pads.
Awesome. Well, maybe we'll do something special for everybody that signed up for this webinar. I'll see what I can do.
There you go. Do another Wheel of Fortune. But yeah, that's it on that. I think lots of gratitude. So for today, basically, I'm sure we can riff a lot. If anybody hasn't watched, I binge your webinars a lot of the time, like when I have long traveling, because there's always so many good things. And I love the one with Sharon May Davis, and I just adore her as a human being and as an educator. Obviously Bettina Drummond too. I think I've watched hers probably 17 times, just can't not. And it's so cool to listen to everybody's perspectives. But Sharon May Davis, highly recommends people watching all of them, but especially hers. And she's done a lot of incredible research around the missing nuchal lamella, obviously CVM, things that the modern sport horse is really struggling with. And why I say modern sport horse is that it doesn't appear that a lot of these things were going on in, 100 years ago, maybe. And I think that it's really important for people to kind of understand the differences in what the horses today are dealing with versus the horses maybe 100 years ago were dealing with, because a lot of our classical training and a lot of the things that we're looking at, we're trying to base it off of history of horses that were a lot more stable than what we have today. So I can hear ringing. Somebody
it's the phone in the other room. Yeah, it's gone. I was going to run in.
Okay. It was like Zoom. I'm like,
no, it's like this is when you have a shared office with your husband, and that phone decides to ring, and you're like, do I run and get it, or do I let him run down the stairs and get it? He ran down the stairs and got it.
It's all good.
There was nobody there.
And there was nobody there. So it's good. So do you want to chat at all about what your take is? I mean, you've talked to so many people. So what's your take on the differences between the horses?
Well, I think what we have to look at is that we've done a lot of breeding and paid attention to only certain traits and not paid attention to others that we either couldn't see at the time, we're now seeing in post, or, are part of what we chose. Mm-hmm. So, when you go for hypermobility, you're going to lose stability. And I'm sure that's one of the things that you always see with horses is that balance between mobility and stability. And so maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So especially as my heart horses, not in general, but the main horse breed that I have is Andalusians, and Andalusians really struggle with hypermobility anymore. It's something that we've seen more and more in the horses. And what we mean by hypermobility is you get these big, flashy, extravagant movements, and a lot of warm bloods have this too. And it's why I really dove deep down the development of muscles and really understanding like what muscles and like what the actions were and the antagonists and all of that was because I was trying to figure out what muscles on a horse needed to be developed in order for them to do a specific job. So if you wanted horses to have certain movements, they should have certain muscles to back that up. And what we're seeing with the hypermobility is that the horses are having these like crazy extravagant movements, but they don't have the muscular development. It's just coming from this like over elasticity through the joints. They're getting, and it causes them to almost just go into using compensatory patterns from the get-go, which is wild. One of the things that I wanted to screen share, and it's off of, you can, and anybody can Google these things. They're really easy. This is all free resources. There's links on the bottom of them. But just something to note, I think it's really important for me. I've really been trying to educate people a lot on the missing nuchal lamella because it's just like, I feel like Sharon just needs all the help that she can get of just putting this down people's throats until they really just stop and look at the horse's neck and see the fact that they don't have the stability that they used to and that they're supposed to, and what can we do about it is my big thing. So I'm going to see if I can figure out our screen share here. Maybe. There we go.
Okay. And
go ahead. It's just that while I'm trying to.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's just that button at the top there. We did it before and you were good. So I'm sure you'll be able to figure it out.
You had it before. The problem is my window closed down, but I will give me 2 seconds.
Okay, no problem. But, I think that this is what we're looking at, and I actually have been talking to thoroughbred breeders as well, is we're looking at, again, like breeding for certain traits and forgetting that there's other things that are important. And I don't know how we come back off this cliff unless we start breeding in some more pony types, actually. Some of these, sturdier, shorter necked, more stable necked animals into our bloodlines. I don't know how you'd ever get anybody to agree to that at a sport horse level.
Right. Yeah. I have a couple of dear friends that are breeders, very, very, very ethical breeders. And they're very big in making sure that like nobody has ECVM, that nobody had, like, they're very careful about these issues before breeding, but they were talking about it. And they're like, it's what's sad is probably in the next 10 to 20 years, having bloodlines that don't have ECVM is going to be a rarity at this point. And so the best thing that we could probably do is to find what lines still exist. There's not many already, but what lines still exist that don't have that at least. And Sharon talks about, I think she says there's like 6 or 7 primitive breeds still that exist today that still have their nuchal lamella. And again, to your point, like, I don't know how many sport horse breeders would really buy into like, let's bring some of these more Brumby looking horses in, but it would be the smartest thing to do, get our nicest stock that does not have as many abnormalities in it, breed them back to these animals and these breeds and these lines that are more consistent and more strong and have the stability, and see what we could get. But I don't know what we can do for that. Well,
maybe there's a breeder out there that's listening that'll start thinking about how to cross in some of these sturdier lines.
Please. I think it would be brilliant. So for the nuchal ligament, and I can send these links or copy and paste them in the chat.
Great, you got the references right there.
Mm-hmm. So this is really cool, and I think it's important to note because some of the arguments that Sharon has been getting is, oh well, maybe they just never had this missing nuchal lamella, like it's always been there, which is a little bit silly. So if you look back in veterinarian textbooks, you can see, so over here, Exhibit A. So this is from George Stubbs back in 1777, so a couple hundred years ago at this point. And his showcase is actually from T1, and it comes all the way up. So we have our funicular cord on the top, and then coming down from the side, we have the lamellar attachments. And then in B, again, 100 years later, Ellenberger does very similar drawing. And then coming down C and D, we've got 1993 and again in 2000. What I know is that the first two, when you read the textbooks, it says that it is based off of numerous dissections, and which were not really big at the time. So they didn't have access to like lots of them. They were very, very, very specific, but on their numerous dissections, the illustrations were all backed by that. So we know, I would assume we would know that they had it back then. There's, that's what they're saying. What I don't know is when it started to kind of disappear. And I know Sharon has a lot of ideas around that she hasn't published yet, but I don't know if with Smith and Goody's if those were based off of dissections as well, or if it was one of those like, well, you know, Ellenberger and Stubbs did it, so we'll do it too. I don't know about that one, but we know that it at least existed. And then this is one of the pictures from Sharon's research. And again, if you just Google Sharon May Davis missing lamella, so many of these will come up. But what I think is really important for people to realize is that when these pieces come down, they should come down and they should attach down through here and stabilize and support the cervical spine. And they should support it from dropping down too low. They should support it from, you know, jangling around too much and getting that excess movement that oftentimes will give us, you know, if the body has excess movement, the body is going to lay down calcium because it's going to have heat and friction. And then we're going to have arthritis. And caudal cervical spine arthritis is a really big deal. And most everybody, I feel like, that has a performance horse at one point or another has heard of this. And I think that that's a big cause for where a lot of that comes from, that instability in the cervical spine. But what I personally find, and like kind of more of what I'm going to talk about today in terms of training, that I find really fascinating is if you look at the attachments, and in a lot of the things that she'll say at C5, and you can even see in this picture, it's pretty weak. Sometimes it's obsolete. So our strongest attachments really off of it are coming down right around this area where it's C2 and C3. And that's where most horses break at. You can hear, or that it's a term that will say the horses are broken at C2 and C3. So they are now behind the vertical. Their pole is no longer at the highest point. And I'll stop sharing just for a second and come back out of here. And I just kind of want everybody to think about that for a minute, because the number one training issue that I have that comes into me is horses that are going behind the vertical. It's everywhere. It's like that in pretty much every discipline. It's obviously really bad in dressage, but it's bad in the hunter jumpers. It's bad in Western. We see it in reining. We see it in working cow horse. It's horses that are just kind of chronically going around behind the vertical a little bit or a lot if it's in hyperflexion. And one of the things that's interested me as a trainer and somebody that's been rehabbing these horses is I have only come across a couple of trainers that actually were riding roll cur style. I haven't actually come across very many horse trainers that want their horses behind the vertical. Most of them are constantly like pushing them forward. And what can we do to get them out? And it's this chronic issue that we're running into and we can't seem to solve it. And so similarly to what I went down my rabbit trail of the nerve compressions and the muscle development, I've been really chasing this thread of horses going behind the vertical for the last about 2-3 years straight. And one of the main pieces that I found that for me, I don't know if it's like this for you or for anybody else, but for me, looking at that picture was a huge light bulb moment in the fact that all of a sudden what should be stabilizer muscles all the way down through the thoracic, half of them are gone. And our main stabilizer that they have is at the place that the horses are wanting to break behind. And I just found that really fascinating. And I was like, okay, so if that's where the body almost wants it to go, and I had my own personal mare struggled with this. I got her at 10. She had barely any training before me. I never even put a bit on her. She was never ridden that way, but there was something about her that kind of naturally, when she would go off balance, do that. And around that time, I played with a few different people and body workers and learned that the thoracics, it was almost like antagonistic. So if a horse is inflated through the thoracic sling, and you can see this, like the cheap party trick is to do a little belly lift underneath the withers. And if a horse is behind the vertical and you get them to actually activate and lift up through their sling, their head comes in front. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And so it's really, so you're like, okay, so if a horse is using its sling, it's not going to go behind the vertical. So if you're holding your horse behind the vertical, they can't be activated in their sling. And so it was like this neat thing that we were playing with. But when you really break it down and you look at it and you think about like the serratus muscles, and there's a lot of other muscles that are in play there, but especially those serratus muscles, and with a sling, that's really the only other muscle set that works together when everything's kind of powered up and using together. It's really the only other thing that's working almost like a mimic of what was there for the lamellar attachments. It's the only other thing that lifts up. And you'll see this in like countless before and after photos. And we see it before and after with the SureFit pads too, when the horses get activated through it, because they'll have their neck will appear shorter. And if you measure it, it will be shorter because it's almost like the caudal cervical spine drops down and back and underneath the scapula. And then after time of kind of coming out and being able to find that extension again, all of a sudden it lifts back up. So now all of a sudden we have a neck that's a little bit bigger and there's more scope to it. They have I can't remember, I can't think of the name, but there's all of a sudden you get this change in the neck of the telescoping. You have a horse that can like have that nice telescope neck, but that comes from that caudal cervical spine coming up and out of the shoulders. And all of it happens with the thoracic sling.
Can you check your volume and just turn your volume? Somebody says that the sound is pretty low, and maybe you can turn your volume up. I don't have a lot of control over your volume at this end. I hate to interrupt your flow, but
we'll see. No, it's okay. We'll see. I can lean over the mic and be even closer if that's better. My volume's up as good as it's going to go. So
being a little closer, or move your mic a little closer to you, one or the other.
So I try to be really mindful with people on, there's a lot of online bullying, and there's a lot of keyboard warriors, and I have to be careful sometimes of not also being a keyboard warrior. And I think we all do. Like every once in a while we'll see a post that flies by and we're like, like this person is damaging the horse, and you want to stick up for them and you want to do these things. And as somebody that is kind of really in the competition world and watching these trainers and watching what they complain about firsthand, one of the things that has been a focus of mine is how can we, instead of just saying how your training is wrong and what you're doing is bad, and oh my God, these horses keep going behind the vertical, like you should, be burned to the ground for everything that you're doing. How can we educate them on how to get the same results, but do it in a different way, and maybe do it in a better way? And how can we just use education and kindness a little bit more to see, because they're not going to stop wanting to train their horses, and they're all dealing with the same problems. So what I've been chasing is really showing people that missing laminar attachment, showing them that, hey, this is where the horses are going. Good trainers are struggling with this. There's a lot of good trainers out there, and you still watch the horses kind of tuck behind. So what are a couple of things that we can do about it? Surefoot pads is really helpful. Development of the thoracic sling is imperative to really making sure that they can come up and out of it. Good bit mechanics is a really big one. You had a spectacular couple of webinars with our friend Jillian, and she really went in and explained the hyoid. And I think that that's something I always send people to that webinar. I'm like, listen to this. It's a really great breakdown of it. But when, our horses are chronically ridden with bits where it's that a little bit of the backwards pressure, a little bit of downwards pressure. We have too tight of nose bands. We have flash nose bands. We have things that are encouraging the tongue to depress and suck back all the time. That little action that it does all the time, it activates those deep ventral neck muscles, pulls the sternum forward, shuts down their little shoulders, makes it so they can't activate their sling, and then they go to tuck. And so a lot of the things that we've done to alleviate it is educating people on this, and then educating them around good bit mechanics, lifting up into the corners of the lips, teaching the bit to lengthen and release so that your contact means a release of the tongue versus a sucking back. Again, Surefoot pads are really spectacular for that. The Mayan handwork is really good for that as well, because it's teaching the body to lengthen those deep ventral neck muscles in the tongue versus then contracting them. And then the problems just magically go away, and we have horses that are able to activate and get into their sling. They're up and open. They're no longer behind the vertical. They're calmer and in their parasympathetic state. Same thing in that webinar. Jillian so beautifully explained the vestibular system and the petrosa bone, and how when all of that gets locked up, the horse's inner ear balance goes out. Like, you've got all of these crazy things that can happen. And it's things that, because the horses in the old classical manuals, I think, didn't struggle with the same issues that we had, they didn't have to be as mindful of some of the things that we have to be mindful of today.
So essentially it sounds like, we're on what's the word for it, on this unconscious level, or this this level below where we're at. We've been largely dealing with a structural problem that isn't fully acknowledged, and the structural problem combined with excuse me, either poor saddle fit or rider mechanics or poor bits and that sort of thing only compounds it, so that we wind up seeing more and more horses that are compressed.
Yeah. And for a fun, maybe not so fun, but for an interesting experiment for all of you, one of the things that you can play with, and I have, if you look back, and dressage is easiest, I think, because it's the most well documented, but it could be, I even played with like John Wayne's horses, and I was like, who's another big thing that was like older, you know, back then? I'm like, oh, John Wayne's a perfect one. Guy was really cool, but he kind of rode like a gorilla, you know, he was really is big dude, and he was really hard on the Western bit. He did, I'm sorry. You know, he was really hard on the curb chain. And you look at all of these pictures back then, and you were hard pressed to find horses 100 years ago plus that are behind the vertical. You won't find them very well.
Oh, that's really interesting. So
I
by
have a very hard time believing it's because the training was just so much more spectacular.
No,
if
anything, our training techniques have become much more conscious, right? Much more aware, and for a number of reasons. It doesn't mean that everybody's, you know, training ethically, but the majority of people are trying to do right by their horses, and yet we're still seeing this problem. So that begs the question: why are we seeing this? And if we dig deeper, we start to find out that there's the potential for this missing lamina that's basically the root of this problem. And we can't just go and put the lamina back in. That ain't going to happen on the horses that we have. We have to figure out how to train the horses we have, while hopefully considering breeding horses that crossing them in with something that still has more of a lamina to bring stability back to the neck.
And the other thing about it too is, you know, it's the neck for sure, obviously, because those are the pieces, because it's supposed to work like a suspension cable off of a bridge, right? They all come down, and it should all just hold and support all the way down. And it goes from the neck, and then there's little attachments that come down through the spine. I'm deeply curious, and I haven't been able to find, you might know, I'm sure you would know before that I did, but I'm really deeply curious if the people that are studying genetic kissing spines, if they are looking at the lamellar attachments or just the different attachments from the supraspinous ligament into the spinous processes. And I'm just curious if the integrity of that has gone down, because with DSLD cases, a lot of that, we're seeing it in the fetlocks, but it's a whole body suspensory issue. But a lot of it is coming from those suspension cables and the health and wellness of that nuchal ligament and that supraspinous ligament. And I'm just really curious, like, are people looking into that? Because if our suspension cable is struggling, the rest of the body is going to struggle.
Can you put your pictures back up again, or another picture of the nuchal ligament?
The one that's missing, or
no, the one where they have them, the pictures where they have them, because I just had a thought as an illustration of this. Yep, and just go back to the drawings. There you go. Great. Okay. So, you know, recently we had a bridge collapse not far from me. Okay, I live on the East Coast in Virginia, and the bridge over the Chesapeake Bay totally collapsed when the tanker hit it, and it collapsed so rapidly that they were lucky that not more people died, that they got people off the bridge. But when you think about this lamina now, and you look at it here, and if you think of it, I'm
going to do one better. I'm going to give you a full body
shot.
Oh,
perfect.
This one.
Because if you think about it from the perspective of that bridge, if you break this lamina in one place, it's having a chain reaction through the entire system.
Yes.
And so, you know,
with it not supported? Yeah, I mean, basically it stops being fully supported about here.
Right.
And then, so all of this extra tension, that's going to pull, and I mean, this is just me looking at physics, that would pull the spinous processes together.
Right. Exactly. And it would put a tremendous amount of stress on those lower cervicals. What? Go ahead.
Yeah. My mare I just lost last month. We had been chasing, she's the main reason why I was chasing the behind the vertical thing. She's when I was telling you about that I got, and she just always like, and like quite extreme, and I could never quite get her. And I tried all kinds of fancy tricks with her, and all of my favorite trainers clued in, body workers, nobody could find anything. There was nothing wrong with her. Super athletic. And she didn't really ever, I could tell it, she never really like want to be ridden. Every once in a while she would be like, yeah, you can get on and go for a ride, but she didn't really want to be ridden. And she was a companion to Dragon, my late stallion. And So I was like, well, as long as you can keep him happy, that's fine. So I never really asked much of her. When we moved here to Medford, I was like, I have an indoor arena now. I have like full facilities. So I'm like, I'm going to put all my horses back to work. It's going to be so lovely. And I started bringing her in, and I was like, okay, like I understand all of these different attachments. I understand the tongue. I've been having incredible success with client horses for the last 6 months, like the most chronic behind the vertical horses. Like we've been able to alleviate it. Like I'm so on fire about it. And I was so excited to do it with my, with my own horse. So I pulled her out and I was like, Mama, I have this thing to show you. I'm so excited and I have the time and let's do it. And I started doing it with her and she started getting like a pain face with it. And she would do it, but she would get a pain face when she would come up out of behind the vertical. And I was like, that's really interesting. And I had full neck and back x-rays on her previously. We've done all the things. And so I started noticing that she was struggling with it. So I had my vet come out again and I said, hey, can we do full skull x-rays of her? I'm curious at this point if it's a hyoid issue, now knowing what I know about the hyoid and the TMJ and all that. And I said, I wonder, she had at one point years ago, we don't know when she got it or what happened. It was before I had her, but she had a fractured tooth on her right molar. And I was like, it's possible that maybe she injured her hyoid and knowing all those attachments now, maybe something happened there. So he came out and he did full skull x-rays. And he did x-rays of her atlas, and she had a absolutely horrific, it's called an enthesiophyte. It's a calcium growth that comes off of a ligament. And it was off of her, but it was off of the ligament attachment. So the lamellar attachment from her funicular cord to her atlas. And it's off the right wing. And it was so bad that it was low grade at neutral, low grade. It was like irritating the nuchal ligament. But if she went into extension, it would pierce it.
Oh.
So going into flexion was the only time that she could get away from that pain. And there was like chronic inflammation around it. It was like the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen. And, my vet had never seen anything like it. I've sent it to Bexner and I sent it to a bunch of people and they were like, yeah, we've seen it, but not like that. It's pretty nuts. And they're the one thing that they could come up with, they're like, whatever. And it was on the right side. The same with her fractured molar. And they were like, maybe, whatever that impact happened over time, there was just this little growth. And so she was just always trying to get away. And over years, the body is going to lay down more. And so over the years, it had gotten to that point. And when I saw it, I was like, that's it, like we're going to have to put her down. I can't let her live like that. It's this, I can't even imagine living with a chronic migraine is how I interpreted it. And my vet was really sweet. And he was like, well, let's look at it. I can do some injections. We can do some mesotherapy. We can nerve block it so she doesn't have pain. I said, can we ultrasound the rest of the spine? Because I'm curious now. I wanted to ultrasound the whole supraspinous ligament because I was curious if what was going on there affected anything else in the body. Because the only symptom that she had, she was completely sound. She passed all flexion tests. She's walk, trot, canter both directions on the line. Like you would never know there was something wrong with her. But the one symptom that she started getting other than that pain face, and it got a little bit better with the Sherfoot pads and then it would go away immediately. And that was a big clue into me, was she stopped being able to pick up a foot to pick it out. So at static, she couldn't comfortably hold up any of her limbs. She would do it and really struggle with it. And you could really, if you really help her, she could do it, but she couldn't balance. And so anyway, so I had him ultrasound her whole supraspinous ligament, and over her low back, it was like complete, like it was like nothing, like it was just sagging. Like there was no more tension there. It had just gone away. And so from the way that he mapped it, he said, what I think is going on is she has had this inflammation and this tension that's been damaging the funicular cord, just same as the supraspinous, right? All runs together. It's been damaging this for so long that it's been taking a toll and has created like a laxicity in her low back. And without that support from her suspension cables in her back, she's not able to, at static, lift a limb. She can do it in motion. If she got her dynamic motion going and she could use all of her muscles, she was fine. But at static, because she didn't have that suspension cable, she couldn't do it. And so a thought that he had was, he was like, well, we can nerve block her and maybe we'll just put her in like really excessive work and see if we can build up, some muscling underneath it. Maybe we can redo the tensegrity of her back. And I was like, as soon as we saw it, all of her symptoms are like, she got really worse very quickly, as they do. It's like, as soon as we pay attention, I think it's like, as soon as you buy a blue car, all the cars are blue. And she was very clearly like, I'm done now, like, but I needed you to know, and I needed you to see this. And it's interesting because I have sent multiple client horses to get x-rays of that, and we have found that in a lot of horses, either at the base of the skull or at the atlas. And it really is interesting to tell a story about how to be cognizant and how to be careful, and what the longevity of this horse is going to be as a performance animal if they're struggling with damage into that funicular cord, because it can't have it. So that's an aside from all of the obvious stuff that we're talking about with a missing nuchal lamella and how it can affect, but a little bony piece like that, and the way that it completely dropped out her low back, is wild to me. Like, that's how sensitive and how important this structure is.
Yeah, it keeps making me think about that bridge that it hit that one post and the whole thing collapsed. And so we tend not to realize the tensegrity and the way, I always think of bridges when I think of the suspension system through the nuchal ligament and through the ligaments running all the way back. It's their job is bone to bone, and it's to work without effort, right? It doesn't require a lot of energy to run the ligament system. That's the point of it. It's low energy.
Exactly.
And when that's not functioning, then you have to expend a lot of energy to hold yourself together, basically. When I run across riders that have this lax ligament issues, they're often in pain because they've had to jam themselves to try and make things work. And it's not uncommon at all. Right. So how does that...
another picture I'm going to show.
Oh, great. Okay, super.
And I'm going to preface this by saying these images are not to pass judgment on anything. It's just simply Google these photos, Google horses. This is just everybody's homework. Google horses 100 years ago plus, and look at their bodies and look at how they are now. And then Google just normal. It doesn't need to be anybody in particular, but just Google dressage horses today or reining horses today, and just use your own mind and your own curiosity and your own thoughts, and just look at the differences between the horses. So
one of the things I think it's really true when we look at these, if you think about warm bloods 30 years ago, they were pulling cannons, right? And so they were large with heavy bone, and now they're not. They're not.
So in the 1950s is when women were allowed to start competing in the Olympics. And it started with dressage, and then it went on from there. And one of my conspiracy theories, if you will, is, and Sharon and I have talked about this a little bit, is a big thing for trainers and purchasers are trying to find horses that are easy for amateurs to handle. And if you go from a history of competition horses and what we choose for breeding and what we choose for purpose, and it went from horses that were either actively in war and then coming to compete, they were the same horses, or they were horses that were maybe just competitive horses, but they were ridden by soldiers most of the time. Occasionally you would get men that were not soldiers riding, that were just more upper class, but they were still men. Women weren't competing on these horses yet. So insert 1950s, women are finally allowed to compete with the boys. And we get this spectacular woman who, if nobody's heard of her, please go look up Lisa Hartell and all the cool things that she is. So Lisa Hartell was the first woman to compete in the Olympics. Not only was she the first woman to compete in the Olympics, she won a medal. She competed on a mare, which is just like the coolest thing in the world, right? Like, everybody's out there in their big style, and she comes out on a mare. She's like, watch this, boys. And she was paralyzed from the waist down.
Oh, I did not know that fact.
Yes, I believe from polio. This chick is like the coolest human to ever grace, like, ever. And I don't know how I only found out about her, I don't know, maybe like 7 months ago, I think. Because again, I was researching and I was like looking up anything that I could find, and like, when did the Olympics start and when did women start competing? And And then she popped up and I was like, why isn't this woman's name blasted like across every avenue of
Hey, we've pushed her on Facebook on Murdoch Method for years, but
see, look how cool you are. Yeah.
But I didn't know she was paralyzed.
Yes.
We used to do a Women Crush Wednesday.
Yeah. There's images of her trainer lifting her down from her horse to stand at the podium to accept her medal. And I'm like bawling, like these images are I'm there and I'm like bawling reading this and looking at the pictures. I was like, look at how cool she is. Anyway, so I'm using her because I think she's spectacular and her mare is also amazing. But I put these pictures of her and then of Charlotte on Vallegro because I think everybody knows Vallegro. Like he's super popular. And what's really important to note about this is that he's a stallion and this horse is a mare, which anybody that has ever looked at stallions versus mares, you know that there should be physiological differences between like the density of their necks, especially. That's a big tell between stallions and mares. And looking at the changes in these horses are wild. I got off a quick tangent. Well, here, I'll show you this picture and then I'll go back to my tangent. Okay, so check this out. So this is at the 1956 Olympics on the left. This is Lisa and Jubilee. And then on the right, this is Charlotte and Vallegro. Look at how very cleanly and succinctly this mare's poll is at her highest point. And when I say her poll is at her highest point, I mean that her poll is higher than C2 and C3.
And her nose is
and then you come over here, and this is a good shot.
Yeah,
that's what has to happen for that to be. And then we come down here, and arguably, like his nose is in front of the vertical, so this isn't a bad shot of them. But you see the little bow here?
Yep.
Just subtle, right? And then I thought this was another great shot. So here he is a little bit behind the vertical, and this is more common for where he's at. And you see how much bigger that bow gets, and it's just quite substantial. Versus hers is just a really nice clean shot. Look at the difference in the base of the neck on this animal versus him. This is a mare, right? This is like, it was just bananas to me sitting here and looking at this. And I was like, I cannot believe the difference in the structure of it. And then I captured this shot. And again, these are blurry old black and whites, but you can kind of get it. And you see where he's like almost flattened out here because he's so used to bulging here. And just the fineness of his neck versus, I mean, look at this thing.
Yeah. And she's got an underneck on her too. I mean, she's got a thick
and
neck.
She has an underneck, which, knowing what I know now. And so here's an interesting thing to mention about that underneck is I have gotten a fair amount of crap from older school classical dressage trainers they're much older than me, and they're like, this girl doesn't get it because I'm always talking about like a loose underneck, and I'm trying to like really encourage people to have a lot of relaxation through the tongue, the hyoid, the brachiophalicus, those deep ventral neck muscles. It's really important so that we can get access to the sling. This is like, I gave out pillar 1 for free. I'm like, come on guys, like I'm trying so hard to educate on people this because it's like the golden key. And there's a demographic of people that think that it is complete and utter BS. And when I look at that picture, it was a really cool moment for me to look at that picture for her, because when I look at that photo with the lens that I have from the education that I have gotten and from what the horses have taught me over the years, in this generation, right? Because these are the horses that I'm learning on. I didn't get to learn on those horses. I would look at Lisa's mare and I would say, wow, that's one heck of an underneck. She's not using her body appropriately. She does not have a good sling. I don't like it. I don't like the way that neck looks. On that mare, I would almost bet you that she probably had her nuchal lamella, judging by judging by what her neck looked like and how activated and nice she was in her sling and her shoulders. I bet she did. And I bet she didn't require the same subtleties that our horses today require because she had the attachment, she had the support. But I have no idea what it's like to work with those horses, aside from mules and donkeys, because donkeys, I believe, still have all of theirs, and theirs are a little bit, it's different. Yeah. But I understood in that moment, I was like, I understand now what the disconnect is between me and this other kind of demographic of older trainers that are saying, oh, there's, that's BS, blah, blah, blah. Because they're right. It probably wasn't important back then. And even in their generation and their trainers and the way that they were trained and the horses were sound and the horses did good things, they were right. And so what I'm saying is a little bit counter to that. And I think I understand now what that was. And it wasn't, because I'm not a big believer in like, you're right, I'm wrong, vice versa. I think that if we can all sit down and chat, there's almost always like a little thread of truth that we're all chasing, and we have to find it. And that photo to me meant everything. I was like, I understand now. I understand why you're like, they're right. My work wouldn't have been imperative, if you say, back then, because they were fine. They had the structures. So if you think about it, then it's post 1950s, 70s, 80s was kind of when I started tracking, when you could start to see horses going a little bit more behind the vertical. And now it's like way worse now. Or even because somebody said, fact check, I think Vallegra was a gelding. I thought he was a stallion, but even still, with a gelding, I mean, but male horses have more substantial necks than mares most of the time.
Well, looking at the structure of the neck, you could see that that C2, C3 area was definitely different. So, whether or not he was a gelding or stallion, was definitely a difference. And apparently the woman was paralyzed from the knee down. But
knee down. Okay. Even that's almost worse.
But even still, that's amazing, right? Right. It's amazing. So
I mean, like as a rider, I would almost prefer my hips down to my knees down. That's gnarly.
Yeah. But I keep going back to, are we looking at a breeding problem? And the more we certainly know with ECVM, we're looking at a breeding problem, right? And with the lack of nuchal ligament, obviously it's a breeding problem because it's happening, right? And it's happening in all our horses. And until we actually, as an industry, acknowledge that we have to start reversing this trend, I'm not sure where it's going to go. Because that's
the point on. Sorry, it's lag.
It's okay. I mean, the question, not that we're not doing good work, but the question is the work that we're doing, do we have to do what we have to do for our horses because of where they are in their physical body at this point, right? And the problem is there's no way to know if that nuchal ligament is missing. I don't think you can you ultrasound it? Can you x-ray it? I don't know that there's any.
No, somebody mentioned that they thought that you could do that, maybe an MRI could come up with it, but you can't ultrasound it. You can't x-ray it. However, I will say in all of the dissections that Sharon has done, she's never found it. It's been missing in all of them. And in all of the dissections, and like dissections are kind of a big deal now. Like now a bunch of people are doing them and they're all saying the same thing. I don't think that there are many horses today, I mean, domesticated, that have it. I think we're pretty well toast on that.
Okay. So what it means then in terms of, what we can do about it. I mean, I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit. So do you think that this lack of nuchal ligament is causing so many nerve impingements in the brachial nerves?
Yeah, I think that the lack of it is causing the excess motion. Basically, I think that the lack of it means it's why so many of us that have been talking about the thoracic sling for however many, I mean, there's been people that have been talking about it for 40 years before I ever mentioned it. It's been a thing. I know. There's a lot, it's so funny. People are like, oh, like this, like a lot of people for a long time have been talking about this. Like, this isn't just not just me.
No, but it's just,
but we all know that it's important because we see the immediate changes in a horse's body and their nervous system when they have a developed sling. Like, we know that it does something. But if you look at the structures and you say, okay, so these domesticated horses, these are our modern horses today, if the only structure that they have to really stabilize and support that caudal cervical spine and the rest of their body is by having a developed sling, then it's really, really important, because that's why when they don't have it, we have horses that have chronic nerve compression issues. They have chronic arthritis. They have chronic undiagnosed lamenesses that they can't figure out, but they palpate really sore in the neck and the shoulders. And then we do our thoracic sling work and it just magically goes away. And I think it's because it's supporting that cervical spine. And I have countless pictures of horses' necks that have completely changed. And you can look at it and be like, if this didn't have a nuchal lamella, I could see why it looks like that. And then now it has a sling and now it looks better. And
Well, we're basically, I mean, to put it simply, if the ligament, which is a passive system, right, it works in position and it doesn't require a lot of energy. If that's missing, what you have to do is replace it with muscular work, period.
right.
And so by strengthening
And
the
I think that
thoracic,
it's important to know.
go ahead.
Sorry. I think it's important to note too that like, so I think that the serratus is a big key player for that one for
Huge.
sure. And that's not supposed to be its job, is the thing that's also important to note. That shouldn't be that was never meant to be its sole job. So even though developing it is really wonderful and we get a lot of support with it, we're having to be really careful about our horses and the way that they're going, in that we don't want to overuse the muscle and give it its own compensatory job, if you will, because it kind of is, to help all of a sudden take something that should be using like for glide and different movements and be like, and also can you hold up the neck. It's a little bit different.
Well, and that's where we need the pecs coming in to really help too, since they're underneath and they can.
Well, big time.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So basically,
it has to be the whole thing.
Right. So, let me see if what I'm hearing is right. Horses don't have that nuchal ligament certainly at C6 and 7, and maybe not even at C5. So the base of the neck is not stabilized by a ligament that is low energy use, engaged in position. Okay. So now we have to basically help the horses develop muscular development to be able to keep the thoracic sling engaged, to keep the withers up so that the neck doesn't get compressed. So here's my question. How young should we be developing thoracic slings and foals?
So I have my breeders start getting little cookies out and bribing horses in pillar 1 walking from the time they're a few days old. I've been doing that for a couple of years now. And basically, as soon as we can get the chance to kind of help uncrunch them, and being born is tough, man. Like it's tough on babies. It's tough on baby humans. It's tough on baby ponies. They come out and their little shoulders are all smooshed and their little neck is smooshed back and their little hips are all smashed together. Like, if the best thing that you can do is to like get right in with a newborn and be like, okay, let's see whatever we can do. But I think it's really important.
And you can use Surefoot pads with foals. We've actually used them with newborns.
I would love to do that. Oh my God.
Yep. Use the full physio pad and you just kind of guide them over it. But we had a little a twin foal, and the mother rejected him and kept the one. And so we went to see him, and she was bottle feeding him every several hours. And we just set out the pads. This was in New Zealand, and Marie McAteer and I, and we guided him over the pads, and he stood on the next day. He was up and gating. It turns out he was gated. We didn't know it.
Oh my goodness.
And it was his name is Cool As. I have to get a report. I have to see how he's doing, because that's that was 2019. So, but yeah. So, we actually have webinars on using Surefoot pads with foals. But that's my point is, we can't wait to delay development of that really important system if this is not, if they just don't have the ligaments that they need. Right. Bottom line.
Yeah. So bottom line is you should start from the very beginning, and you should not ever get on a horse unless it has a neutral spine.
That brings up a really big point, is like you see people wanting to get on their horses young because they're not as quote unquote strong. But how much damage are we doing getting on horses that aren't strong enough to be sat upon in the way that we're doing it, right? I mean, I'm trying to say this judiciously, obviously, but I think we have to yeah, go for it.
I'll throw in a quarter on this one. Okay. So here's my take on that, but we're going to talk about it in terms of like the breeding and what's happened. So if you look back and you say, okay, so women started being able to compete in the 1950s. Now all of a sudden we have to women become more of the predominant purchaser. Women become what we're trying to get. And so when we look at a lens from a trainer and what we want to get for our horses, having horses, statistically, what we've seen is, along with the people that we have been riding and the way that the horses have been going, essentially we have been breeding horses to be easier to yield to the hand. That's what we've been doing. We're like, oh, women probably can't manhandle these really bad, huge, strong army horses. And I will tell you, I've had to get on and rehab horses that were men's jumpers, and I could not hold them because they just pick up. I can't, and I'm too lazy. I have no interest in doing that. And it's bad for the horse anyway. But when that's the history of it, and then all of a sudden we start getting this influx in women riders, we're going to start choosing horses that are easier to yield to the hand. They're a little bit more sensitive. They're a little bit more pliable. They don't want to put and use that whole neck against them. And that's kind of my conspiracy theory, if you will, as to like how we've gotten to where we've gotten. And, you know, people cannot like this all they want, but this is the truth. And I can tell you that this is the truth because it has been my experience from the countless hundreds of horses that I have worked with at clinics. The warm blood horses that I have gotten on and helped with people, their riders are purchasing horses that are going in about 4th level, way too young, by the way. And maybe they're not showing too young, but they are trained and schooled up through 4th level movements so that when they become the appropriate age, they go out and they do the thing. The riders that are riding them are not skilled riders. They're not. They are not skilled riders. I could put them on one of my bridle horses and they would not be able to steer. They would just sit there and spin. They wouldn't know what to do because they don't have any control over their buttons. But they have a lot of money, and they can go and they can purchase these warm blood horses that are a little dull, and you can pick them up and you can crank them and spank them enough, and they're easy to yield to the hand. They're easy to yield their minds, and they go to work and they win the ribbons. But if any of us got on these horses that are good horsemen, I get on them and the first thing that I say is this horse is not actually broke. It's not. It does not have the things, but we can package them together so well because they're not as strong as they should be. They're hypermobile. They're not super opinionated. All of us, obviously, like you're going to get a few that are, and those are the ones that usually fail out by 3rd level. Something happens and they just can't make it past 2nd or 3rd level. We don't know what, you know, these are things that are an issue. This is how we're breeding them. And then you have the idea of, well, I want to get on these young horses and get them started while I can still manhandle them. That's been the conversation the whole time. Instead of, can we develop horses with a sound nervous system so that we don't need to manhandle them at all? There's a thought. I mean, I have a 6-year-old Iberian warm blood who is hotter than hot, who I have been slowly starting over the last course of the last year. And it is possible. You don't have to get on and manhandle them to get things done, but you have to go slow and you have to rise as horsemen. And one of the things that I think is really sad, but it's something that I talk about a lot so when I talk about like pillar 1 and trying to get horses into that receptive energy, it's hard for a lot of people to do because they want this idea of like, oh, just put the horse's head down. Just put the horse's head down and take them for a walk. We could just rig them. But that doesn't work because then the horses are in tension and they're in the sympathetic state. And I know you run into this with the surefoot pads, and we're just going to put them on the surefoot pads and make them stand there, right? And it's like that very essence of
it's I've not surefoot
for you on that. By the way, I've been like, I have talked to Wendy, and that is absolutely not how those were intended. Take them off. Yeah. Very heated about it. Because it's not, because the whole nature of it is going at the nervous system, because that's how you get access to the body. You have to rise as a horseman and do that. And people don't want to do that because they want to just bulldoze and get these quick fixes. And it's, you know, it's what's going to set us apart. But the more these horses have these struggles, we're not going to have another option pretty soon.
Yeah. I mean, it comes down to education, right?
You can't bulldoze
and just educating people that that horses, you know, there's I loved Sarah Schulte's talk because she talked about that we're all mammals, right? Yeah. And when we start to recognize we're all mammals, we have the same nervous system as the horses, basically. Mm-hmm. The autonomic nervous system works the same. And when we can relate it back to ourselves and go, well, how would you feel if someone, you know, did this to you? And you'd be obviously like, I wouldn't like it. Then why would your horse like it? You know, and I think the more we can get people to relate to themselves, to the horse, the better off then they can start to understand. But we, you know, there's the culture's been, if the horse won't do it, just make him. And right. You know, and that's changing. It really is changing. I mean, I've seen it changing over the course of my life.
Hugely so.
Right. That's the key, education.
Yeah. And that's, and that's my main thing, and the main thing that I wanted to bring to you guys, and what I've been trying to explain to people when I go to clinics, is to not just go out there and kind of have this heated fist of, oh my God, look at all these people riding behind the vertical, but instead going to them and say, hey, do you know why your horse is doing that? Has anybody ever shown you this? Like, can I show you like the, the anatomy of the horse and what's going on? It's crazy. And then I show them and they're like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. And I'm like, yeah, check this out. If we like tweaked a little bit of these things and worked to develop the sling, then they're no longer going to have that issue. And almost every time they've backed off the training and they wanted to go back and do it right, and they revisit. Like, more people want to do it right than we think, but you can't just hate on them and tell them that what they're doing is bad without giving them an alternative in education.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is so much the key. And it is so easy to just point out a picture or pick on a particular individual, but we're never in that person's shoes. We don't know what they know and what they don't know. Mm-hmm. So I think a little kindness goes a long way.
I agree very much so. So those are my main points that I have for you today.
Yep. Marie says, yep, education, show them what they can do. They are only doing what they know. Absolutely. And what they've been shown, what they've been told is the right thing to do. And you have to give them options and let them kind of figure it out. And it takes time. There's no shortcut. There are shortcuts in that you can learn technique, but to learn that technique, you have to be open to the realization that you've got to look for something else, and then the tools are there. Right? I always say, the teacher appears when the student is ready, and that's so true with this as well. So, well,
it's so
Celeste,
true.
I want to thank you.
Do away with your old training.
Oh, hey, look, it's hard to break habits. I read about habits all the time. I read about, what we have to do to break habits, because there's habits I'd like to break and I haven't broken them yet.
Gosh. Yeah. Me too. I know. And I mean, and even like with the bit stuff, I was trained completely backwards to how I teach now. I was like, and every time I've learned something new that's a better way. Because it's not to say like I'm like, cool, I was effective, right? My horses were winning. We did the things, but it wasn't as good as it could have been. It wasn't as correct as it could have been. Right. And so every time I've learned some new piece, I've had to go through like my own mini like ego eradicator of like, everything that I know is a lie. I shouldn't be doing this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, we all do it. So
yeah, we just, you fall into the hole sometimes, but you just have to crawl out and get back up and go again. And, I mean, I can look back at some of the pretty horrific things I've done. And so my karma is I have to teach more people what not to do because of what I did.
Right. Yeah. And we get that. And I think that comes with a lot more empathy too, when we're able to teach people and be like, hey, I totally get why you're doing this and why this is working for you. Like, I get it. Also, check this out. It comes with a lot more potency, I think, when you can sit there and truly be like, yeah, I know, I did it. Totally get it.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome, well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's been a pleasure to see you. I'm so excited about you being in Medford. It looks like I've been watching your window behind you, your son and your dog.
My sunshine. Oh yes, yeah, my kid.
That was really fun, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. And I really appreciate you joining me tonight.
Absolutely. Please let me know if you're ever in Medford area and come say hi. Come hang out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I could think of the person's name who wanted me to come back and do a clinic there, maybe I'll be back out.
Good. Yes, please.
My organizer knows who it is. I forget those details, but fortunately I have someone else to keep track of that.
Awesome.
Awesome. Right, well, thank you so much. Thanks everybody, and have a great night.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.